Hi guys, welcome back to another Star Wars Legion painting tutorial. In this video we're going to be showing you how you can paint the Rebel Troopers, and once again I'll be using the Army Painter range of paints to do so. Before we start painting, we first of all need to apply a primer so that the later layers of paint adhere to the miniature's surface. For this I've used a grey primer applied through my airbrush, but any aerosol primer that is suitable for plastic is fine. The reason that I'm using a grey is due to the miniature's use of mid-tones such as browns and tans, which will cover much more easily over a grey than they would have done for a black or a white primer. The first area that I'll be painting will be the light tan areas of this miniature, which in this case cover the shirt and the trousers. For this we'll be starting off with a base coat of Monster Brown. As with all of the base coats that I'll be painting in this video, you'll want to mix this paint in with some water in roughly equal quantities to make the paint easier to work with. With our paint thinned out, we now want to paint all those light tan areas of this miniature. Don't worry about getting perfect coverage with your first layer, as this is why we've watered down our paint. After applying your first layer, allow the paint to dry before applying a second layer over the top. This layering technique will give a much more uniform looking finish without potentially obscuring details by applying the paint too thickly. In this next step, I'll be continuing with our tan coloured areas, but this time we'll want to apply a layer of Banshee Brown. However, before we can do this, we want to reduce the strength of the pigmentation in the paint, and for this I'll be mixing in some Warpaints mixing medium from the Army Painter. Much like the base coat, we want to use a ratio of roughly 1 part paint to 1 part medium. Using our Banshee Brown mixture, we now want to steadily build up the lighter coloured paint on the raised edges of the areas we painted with Monster Brown in the previous step. To do this, apply your first layer so that only a small amount of the darker paint is visible in the recesses. This layer should still be quite translucent. Allow the first layer to dry and then apply a second layer over the top, but reduce the area that you're covering slightly so that you focus more on the raised fold. Repeat this process again and you should be left with a smooth gradient from the dark recesses to the lighter raised areas. By applying these gradients, we can help to make the details in the fabric really stand out. With our base coat and highlight completed, we now want to apply a wash of soft tone ink over these areas, but before we do so we need to again thin it down. This is because applying it straight from the bottle will be much too strong. However, instead of using water this time, I'll be mixing in some of the Army Painter's Quickshade mixing medium, again in equal parts wash to medium. The medium works by reducing the amount of pigment in the ink without changing the consistency of the wash. I find that this results in a much smoother and more subtle result than mixing in water. However, if you don't have access to this medium, you could instead use a distilled water. Now that our soft tone ink wash isn't quite as strong, we now want to apply our ink mix across all the tan coloured areas. The wash will flow into all those recesses and create the effect of shading, which will help to improve the miniature's level of detail. The next area of our Rebel to paint is his jacket, and we want to give it a warm leather brown colour, and so to do this I'll be using leather brown. Much like our earlier base coat, you'll want to create a mixture of 1 part paint to 1 part water and apply in several thin coats. With our leather brown base coat completed, we now want to apply a wash of strong tone ink over the coat in order to improve the shading in the recesses. Remember to again create that mixture of 1 part mixing medium to 1 part ink. With the jacket's base coat and wash completed, we can now start applying some lighter paint to those raised areas, and for this I'll be using Basilisk Brown. For the step, we want to reproduce the steps for painting the raised folds in the cloth, so remember to use your Warpaints mixing medium again. The reason I've chosen a yellowish paint for the step over a light brown one is to give the jacket a worn and weathered appearance, which is perfect for representing the rebel forces. With the jacket completed, we can now start painting the exposed skin on this miniature, and for this we want to start off by applying a base coat of Kobold Skin, and don't forget to apply those several thin down layers. Now that we have a Kobold Skin base coat on our skin areas, we now want to bring out some of those details, and the easiest way to do this is by applying a wash of Flesh Wash. And remember to use your Quickshade mixing medium for the step, as it will be really important to get a subtle, realistic transition from the darker areas to the lighter areas of skin. After allowing your Flesh Wash to dry, we can now apply an edge highlight using Corpse Pale. This lighter skin tone can be used to pick out some of the raised areas, such as the bridge of the nose and also the cheekbones, to really enhance the detail that we have in the facial features. With our skin completed, we can now start working on the light tan colouring of the helmet, and for this we want to apply a base coat of Skeleton Bone. In order to help bring out the detailing in these light tan areas, we now want to apply a thin down wash of soft tone ink. The final step in painting the light tan areas of the helmet is to pick out those details with an edge highlight of Arid Earth. In this next step, we'll be painting some of the remaining areas on this miniature, including the gloves, the backpack, and also the metal band around the helmet. And for these areas, we want to base coat using Chaotic Red. At the moment, our red base coat is a little bit too bright, so to darken it down a little bit, I'll be applying a wash of dark tone ink. This will not only darken down the colour of the red, but also flow into those recesses, helping to bring out those details. The very final step in painting our dark reddish brown areas is to highlight the edges using tanned flesh. The final areas to paint on this miniature are all of the black areas. This includes the weapon, the boots, the belt, the straps, and some other additional items that this miniature is carrying as well. We want to base coat all of these areas using Necromancer Cloak. Now, you may have noticed that the Necromancer Cloak I'm using is in fact a very dark grey, and the reason I'm using this instead of a black paint is to help to create some definition in the surfaces when I come to apply a wash in the next step. With our wash thinned down again, we now want to apply our dark tone ink across all of the black and grey areas. This wash will flow into all of those recesses and create the effect of shading, which will help to improve the miniature's overall level of detail. Additionally, it will also slightly darken down our dark grey Necromancer Cloak, giving our black areas a smooth transition from the black in the recesses to the grey on the raised edges. With some Dungeon Grey, we now want to lightly drag the tip of a thin brush along the raised edges of all those areas we painted with Necromancer Cloak. This will create a small grey line of paint along these edges, which helps the small details on the miniature to stand out. Using a slightly thinned down mixture of paint should also make this task much easier, as you'll find the flow of the paint is much smoother than if you use it straight from the bottle. The final step in painting our rebel is to apply some highlights using plate mail metal. And this won't be a traditional highlight in the sense of our previous ones. We instead want to use this to create the effect of battle damage to some of the areas that you would expect to be made of metal, including the binoculars and also the weapon. By using a thin brush to create some small battle damage effects on this miniature, we help to enhance the ragtag appearance of the rebels. Additionally, you can use this paint to tackle the goggles to create the effect of polarized glass. And here we have the completed miniature, who you can see I've also based. Now, whilst this tutorial focused on the Sergeant of the Rebel Squad, you could apply the exact same colours and techniques to any of the Rebel Troopers, including the AT-RT pilot. Remember to check out the description below, as well as I've included a full list of all the paints that I've used in this video. And so that concludes this video on painting the Star Wars Legion Rebels. Now, if you haven't already done so, be sure to check out our previous video in which I showed you how to paint the Stormtroopers. And remember, there is a full list of all the paints that I've used in this video in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to let me know in the comments below, and also expect much more Star Wars Legion content in the future. So the only thing left to say is thanks for watching, and goodbye.